to Business Today Television. I'm Siddharth Zarabi, and joining me now for a post-budget analysis is Sanjeev, Krishan, the chairperson of PwC in India, and also with us Vivek Singh, Economic Analyst and columnist, ex-officer on special duty to Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Welcome Sanjeev, welcome Vivek. The markets have digested the fine print of the budget, and most people have seen and commended many of the announcements as well as the major numbers, budgetary numbers are concerned. But I want to start with you, Sanjeev, to ask you about the key highlight that you noticed from this interim budget.
Well, I think, Siddharth, first of all, thank you for having us, and good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I think to me, the most significant one is estimating the fiscal deficit for next year at 5.1%. I think on the back of almost a certainty that the fiscal deficit this year would get limited to 5.8% from the 5.9% that was originally budgeted to the 5.1%. I think it does a huge, it goes a long distance in profiling India better, in showing that we are certainly on the path of fiscal prudence, and the fact that there is a huge amount of robustness in our collections. I mean, look at the direct tax collections. Apart from we keep talking about the GST collections and so on and so forth, but look at our direct tax collections as well. They've been pretty robust as well. And I think the confidence and hence the path of fiscal consolidation which has been charted out is something which is very, very significant to me. And all this is being done at a time when, one is not saying that we will necessarily slow down, the capex spending. A large part of the growth that we have had during the course of this year is because of the capex spending that was proposed last year, 30% enhancement, etc. Even this year, even now, in an interim budget, also there is almost 11%, over 11% enhancement in that budget as well, which I suspect that will go up in the eventual budget that will come out in May. I mean, so right now these are interim numbers. I think they will certainly look at enhancing those numbers on a go-forward basis. And honestly speaking, even if that means, and because of some other things, etc., that the fiscal deficit eventually is budgeted at 5.2, 5.3, 5.4% also, I think that shows a very clear path as to how the government is thinking at this point in time. The other thing, of course, I would say is that in some ways, certain amount of certainty has been provided, because you do not want to do. The government has said that we will not do anything retrospective. So which means that, clarity provided, whether it is through the startups, whether it is units in GIFT City and so on and so forth, so that people can plan their capital investments and make sure that they continue to stay the path of, getting more and more investments and excitement about India. I think that clarity that they've provided, that, okay, some of these fiscal giveaways will continue in FY25. The one-year extension that has been given is also something which stood out for me. That clarity was very much needed. And the final one is that all this being done at the same time, the inclusive nature, which is what, we have known this government for now for the last few years. I think the inclusiveness, whether it is women, whether it is agriculture, and so on and so forth, I think all of that is baked in as well. So those are the three big highlights for me, Siddharth, that I would like to point out.
Okay. Vivek, coming to you, and one of the big questions that people are asking, and this is on account of expectations that just as in 2019, there would be something for the middle class as far as income tax is concerned, because you would agree that with inflation being a concern, perhaps some expectation of tax related giveaways that was there, that doesn't seem to have been met. What explains this, and what really is in this budget for the middle class?
Thank you, Siddharth. I think this was an interim budget, and two statements, one by the FM and one by the Prime Minister, made it very clear for me that there will be no big announcements on the tax side. The Finance Minister's statement to the CII 1 month back, where she mentioned clearly that this was a interim budget, and the Prime Minister's statement just before the start of the budget session, where he said keeping in mind the traditions, we will not go in for big announcements. Having said that, last year you had major announcement on the personal tax side, where the minimum rebate for personal taxes was raised to rupees 7 lakh, which is 60,000 per month, which in India to me is a huge number. And this bogey of what's in it for the middle class has been going on for some time now. But as far as I read the Indian economy, the middle class is the biggest beneficiary of three important things that this government has done. One, infrastructure; two, accessibility; and three, economic opportunity. So when you say that the pace of highway construction of India has doubled in the last 9 years, the middle class is the biggest beneficiary. When you say that the number of airports has doubled, middle class is the biggest beneficiary. When you say that the data which used to be 269 rupees per GB is now rupees 10 per GB, middle class is the biggest beneficiary. And most of all, when you say that 39,000 compliances have been reduced, and the average waiting period for a patent application, which used to be somewhere around 2000 days, has reduced to 120. I think it does tell you the direction in which the overall economy is moving. So in my view, it's a futuristic budget which lays the groundwork for the next 25 years.
All right, Vivek, I'll come back to you on another point, but I want to begin and get Sanjeev's views on the capex allocation and the target that's been announced. The bond market reacted positively to the development with the belief that the capex is not as aggressive as was being expected. Some numbers had even spoken about 12.5 lakh crore, and this at 11.1. And if you see the actual spending from the earlier announced program, there is still a sufficient ramp up. Mr. Krishan, what is your own understanding of the government's capex strategy from what was said today? And obviously, it will definitely get updated in just a matter of 4 or 5 months from now.
Yeah, so I think if you look at from a capex standpoint, I think last 2 to 3 years, I mean, the government has been high on capex, and actually that is what has been sustaining the economy and the GDP growth to a very large extent. I mean, private investments, as we know, has been a bit short in last couple of years. I think as and when the final budget is presented, I'm pretty certain. I'm pretty certain that, as I said, this number of 11% that has come in certainly will go up, because I think one clearly needs to be on the path of creating more and more, public infrastructure, so to speak. Now, look at even today. I think when we look at logistics, we were together in Davos, and we were talking about many things about Indian manufacturing in particular, and with all the focus on sustainability, etc. While a significant amount of investments in going into greening, we've spoken about EV, which the finance minister also mentioned. I think some of these will continue to require the government to continue to spend. And that hopefully with the hope that the private sector will then be encouraged to actually be spending as well. So in my view, I think as far as the capex cycle is concerned, this is something which we will continue to see for the next few years, not just for 25. In fact, it is very interesting that I actually read a lot of foreign press these days, which is saying that India is actually now on the investment path, which countries like China was, and are we actually focusing too much on investment and too little on consumption? I certainly believe that India needs to be on the path of capex spending. The government has to be the one which is going to be leading the path. They have been doing so. I certainly believe, whether it is our focus on sustainability areas, whether it is on the tech 2.0 areas, look at the focus now on R&D, renovation, etc. And there has been a corpus which has been laid out even in the interim budget for something like that, which is a 50-year soft loan, so to speak, etc. So, these are all good signs to my mind, because, everything which is critical to civil society, to business, for encouraging business, for India to, actually, the spotlight that it has, for it to actually execute on that, etc. I think that will continue to be needed. And then don't forget that, there is still some work to be done when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to education and inclusivity, particularly women empowerment, and it'd be agriculture, etc., etc. So I think from these standpoints, I do not see that how we will be spending less. In fact, the only thing now to be done is to make sure that the public spending spurs the private sector investments, which I'm pretty certain some of this is, some of the private sector investment is possibly awaiting, a significant event which is not so far away now, I suppose. And that's where I think the public sector capex investments will continue in my mind, no question about that.
That's a good analysis of it. Vivek, you've been there. You have in some ways participated and seen very closely the entire capex strategy of the government, and it also is linked to the way the Modi government chose to undertake economic recovery after the COVID pandemic. All the experts that I have spoken to after the capex number announcement are very clear. They say that the government is not going to get out of the capex creation cycle anytime soon, but the private sector and its ability to contribute to the capex revival is also being discussed. What is your view? What could have been the strategy this time around in the budget makers as far as capex is concerned, Vivek Singh?
I think there's definitely some continuity in the capex numbers that we see, and capex numbers have to be put into context. So, from about more than 3 lakh crores in 2014 to more than 11 lakh crores now, almost a 3.5 times jump. And that coming on the back of a fiscal deficit number, which we have now discussed in detail. But there are two aspects, Siddharth, to the capex numbers that I would like to particularly highlight here. One is these capex numbers come on the backdrop of declining incremental capital output ratio in India, which has almost become half from what it was in 2014. So for the same amount of capex, you're getting double the output. With regard to your question of revival of the private sector capex, I think we do see some green shoots. And the answer to your question was in fact given by the finance minister in her budget, where she did mention that we are reducing the borrowing for the next year. And the borrowing is being reduced so that there is more space created for the private sector to borrow. And also one indicator that I see is the rise in credit growth in recent times, which tells me that we are on the cusp of a major private sector revival, especially when we have policy certainty with respect to taxes in India.
Sanjeev, just a couple of weeks ago, you announced and released the findings of a very major survey which showed that Indian CEOs, which means Indian industry, is very optimistic about future economic growth. The finance ministry in a mini economic survey also gave a very upbeat assessment, including saying that we should aspire for 7% growth. Has the finance ministry taken note of Indian industry's optimism and confidence? And despite these questions around private sector investments being only focused in certain areas, is the overall picture far better than some analysts seem to be projecting? Sanjeev.
So I think, Siddharth, I think the optimism is the optimism that you are referring to is certainly there, and we could see it not just in India but overseas as well, etc., etc. I think that is no question that it is there, and why not? I mean, the global economy faces some headwinds. India seems to be in a sweeter zone not because we are trying to deglobalize, by the way, but we are trying to be responsible player in the global economy, and we're trying to do a lot, whether it is make nearshoring supply chain, whether it is making sure that we are part of the energy transition, whether it is making sure that we are high on the technology transition. It is because of these reasons that India is shining more than anything else. And I think that optimism needs to be executed, that needs to be converted, which is where you need help and which is where all this capex and other things that we are talking about. Now, I think two other things that I would say. I think to continue on a sustained basis, we are actually going to do, as now, the government has also said in their advanced estimates as to what their expectation of GDP growth this year is. In fact, better than the RBI estimates, etc., that have come in. And we saw the IMF numbers also. So I think there is now every agency is now talking about India's GDP growth this year being at around 7%, or so. I think sustaining this will need two things. One is going to be continued investments, and second one is this investment will have to come not just at at what we call the top end. It will have to come at the mid category also. So one will have to make sure that there is investment in MSMEs as we call it, or the mid sector as we call it, because they're very important part of the supply chain or the ecosystem or the value chain of Indian businesses. I think it's very, very important that that happens. And the second one is that certain amount of maybe support will be required from a consumption standpoint when it comes to rural and semi-urban areas, because there we have seen that the consumption patterns. I mean, if you look at 23 consumption patterns, there has been a bit of a slackness. So certain amount of support from consumption support at that level is possibly needed. We know these consumption patterns could get significantly impacted by weather patterns and so on and so forth. So I think we do need that support, and we need to continue to invest also in our, 28% contribution to GDP comes from MSMEs and others. I think that segment also, because they're so important part of our value system, supply chains, and could be vulnerable. I think if that can be supplemented by what is already happening and the buoyancy which the senior folks are showing, I have no doubt that we can continue to maintain the 7% trajectory and more.
Right. Vivek, final comment today to you. We are headed for elections, and I know we are not having a political conversation, but broadly, it's very clear versus 2019, this budget displays extreme confidence, and this is not something that I'm saying, that's pretty much every other analyst saying. What do you think is the broader political economy message out of this interim budget, Vivek Singh?
Well, to me, the first thing which you stated, that the government is very, very confident of coming back. And there's two statements of the finance minister in the budget itself tell me this. One, where she mentioned that when we present the budget in July 2024, and also where she mentioned that I'm sure that the people of India will bless this government, which tells me that the government is confident. At the same time, the government is I see this budget as a very responsible document in the way it has consistently focused on areas which have been priority for this government and have been espoused by the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister on various forums, whether it is the focus on the four jatis of youth, mahila, and poor and farmers, whether it is the focus on the next 25 years, whether it is focused on research, whether it's the focus on the holistic development of agriculture. So when you look at it, it is not just the PM Kisan that we are talking about. We are now talking about a nano DAP after a nano urea. We are now talking about aqua parks. We are now talking about tripling of our fishery resources in the last 9 years. So the political messaging to me is that, which the finance minister also mentioned in a speech, that we are on the cusp of profound economic transformation, where saturation will now be the yardstick from which governments will be judged. And she made a very interesting statement where she said that the lowest level at which the government schemes used to be analyzed in terms of their intensity and impact pre-2014 was the village level. Now it is about reaching each individual beneficiary. And she used a very nice term where she said that saturation is secularism in action. So you have no discrimination and you have sabka saath in the strict sense of the term, where the government is held accountable for the outcomes that it delivers. Okay. And this entire 9-year, 10-year journey that we see, right, we see the shift from fragile 5 to bright spot. We see the shift from double balance sheet problem to double balance sheet advantage.
Thank you very much for that view. You've been in North Block for several years, and you know the nitty-gritty of budget making, and the budget making team, apart from Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, steady hands on the deck. And Sanjeev, you would agree that those steady hands have delivered no surprises. They may not have delivered on certain popular expectations, but not all popular expectations are justified or possible at this time. But thank you very much for taking out time from your schedule to give us this quick reaction to the budget. We look forward to hearing more detailed, granular feedback from PwC in the future, and definitely on the full budget as well in July. Thank you very much to both of you. With that, viewers, it's a wrap. We'll be back with more. Until then, stay tuned in. Goodbye.
Darwin Platform Group of Companies is one of the fastest growing diversified Indian conglomerates with global footprints. It is setting up offices globally and tying up with companies across the globe from multiple sectors. The company has ventured into real estate and construction, stockbroking and finance, arms and ammunition, mining, airlines, and many other sectors.
In today's rapidly evolving business environment, when risk is omnipresent, managing risks is no longer just about ticking a few boxes. Businesses need to maintain a panoramic view of risks to stay ahead of the curve. Join us to explore how organizations can rethink risk to unlock new possibilities and become fit for future. At PwC presents De-Risking the Future in collaboration with Business Today. Celebrate 32 years of leadership in business news with Business Today. From the groundbreaking AI cover of Sundar Pichai to PM Modi's exclusive on G20, we redefine headlines. Now our 32nd anniversary issue explores India 2029, the 5-year agenda with industry titans sharing exclusive insights. So, just BT it for unparalleled perspectives. Business Today. 32 years of leadership, innovation, and business brilliance. Subscribe now.